Hello? Okay, just want to make sure that, that everyone can hear me tonight. First of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. The esteemed president of this university, Dr. Tony Allen, is a childhood friend of mine. And just let y'all know, he's a great leader, but he wasn't a great basketball player in junior high school. Right? But my name is Darryl Wolfie Chambers. I'm the executive director for the Center of Structural Equity. At the Center of Structural Equity, what we argue, our underlying premises is this, that structural inequality in the form of a poor educational system. We have inner city schools in Delaware where we have only 13% of our third graders reading and writing at proficiency. That's criminal. We have an overly aggressive criminal justice system where majority of the people who return from the Department of Correction go to one or three area codes, 19801, 19802, and 19805. And can somebody please tell me what percentage of people do you think live in those area codes? Majority African American, black and brown people. The other thing that we have a poor healthcare system. We have what we call a trauma desert. If you're shot in Wilmington, just a couple numbers for y'all. In the state of Delaware, there's about 1 million people. In the city of Wilmington, we have about 70,000. There is 180 shootings currently reported in the state of Delaware. 50% of those shootings happen in Wilmington. 43% of the people who have been killed this year in the state of Delaware have been killed in the city of Wilmington. 51% of the victims who have been injured by gun violence, it has happened in the city of Wilmington. So we have what we call a trauma desert. Because if you're shot in the city of Wilmington, you don't go to the hospital in Wilmington. You don't go to Christiana Care. You don't go to St. Francis. No, you go all the way down to Newark, to Christiana Care main campus. So we call it right there a trauma desert. And what we argue is that anywhere in America, Chicago, Detroit, Boston, Baltimore, Miami, when you see these compounded factors anywhere, you're going to see violence. And not just the sexy violence, not just the violence they put in the news journal, not just the homicides, not just the shootings, but you're also going to see an increase in domestic violence. You're going to see child abuse. You're going to see things like sexual assault. All these kind of things is compounded. And guess what? Our kids live those experiences every day and they bring them to our schools. So we got to have people who look like us, who act like us, who have those lived experience, who lived in proximities of the phenomenon that we're asking people to study and provide resources for. We got to have those kind of people on our team. We got to have them right there allocating the resources so that the practice, the program, the policies won't impact our communities in a negative way. I grew up in a family, and my grandmother's name was, they called her Libby. It was short for Elizabeth. And she had a unique way of telling a story. And it usually lasts about an hour. But at the end of it, she would tell you why lying was bad and how they can impact not this generation, but future generations down the line. Now, I don't have that much time today, but I am going to try to illustrate my point through a story. But first, I want to tell you about a conversation I had with a city official in the city of Wilmington. And as we were talking, I asked this person, what are the priority areas of the city of Wilmington when it comes down to building healthy, strong, and vibrant communities? How do we promote this health equity inside our communities? They said, well, one thing we got to look at the educational system. But we also got to look at what we call the opioid epidemic. We got to look at homelessness, right? The lack of housing, affordable housing. We have to look at unemployment or underemployment. We also got to look at mental health, because mental health is real. And then she said gun violence. So as we know, the ARPA, the American Recovery Plan Act, Delaware stand to get about $1 billion or so. The city of Wilmington about $64 million. And this person came to me and they said that I'm willing to give you $100,000 for violence prevention. Now keep in mind, the same person just told me that this right here is a high priority. This right here is something that we move forward, it can help bring about healthy communities in our city. So I did the math. I'm really a social scientist, right? So down at the University of Delaware, I'm down the other end. I'm not down there with the hard sciences, but I do know a little bit of math. So I said real quick, so I said that 6 million is what? 10% of 60 million. 600,000 is 1%. $300,000 is 0.5%. And 100,000 is 1/3% of 300,000. So I knew I had to break it down to like $1. And what they were offering us to address our issues and address our problems was, if you look at it in terms of $1, they were saying that they were going to take a penny, break it in half, and break that half into 3/3 and give us the smallest of the 3/3. So through this story, what I want to try to illustrate is that how I came to the realization that it's going to take champions of this work. And we can't blame an institution, an agency, a political figure. We can't assign them to be our equity officers. This is an assignment that you and I must take on ourselves, because everyone is an equity officer. So going back to my grandmother, she said, "Grandson, the reason why I tell you stories is because people can remember stories, and you come from a long line of people who were storytellers, so that when they go home, they can tell other people the story." And I actually made it through college like that, through history, through Marxism. I just tell a story about Marx, and then next thing I know, I can repeat it on the test. But tonight I'm going to tell you about a serious story. Something that happened about 10 years ago. On September the 14th, as I was driving home from the University of Delaware, working on a Marx paper, as a matter of fact, I received a phone call. Now keep in mind, I'm in the business of that every time there's a shooting inside the city of Wilmington, I respond within 24 hours. I go to every funeral of every kid who have died in the city of Wilmington. I also go to kids' graduations. But at this time, we had this cease violence model where we were looking at violence as an epidemic. And what we learned from it was that at every time that someone is shot, it's at that point and at that time in which families think about retaliating. So it was imperative that we, the community violence interworkers, right, the interventionists, right, that we be there to talk to the family about things they may need, to stop young guys from retaliating, young women from retaliating. So I get this phone call. Hey, Wolfie, a kid's been shot on 23rd and West, hurry up. So I get in my car and I'm driving over there, and when I get up on the scene, what I noticed was that the paramedics was working frantically, pumping on this kid's chest, pumping on this kid's chest, pumping on this kid's chest. And in the background, what you seen was a blood splatter on the door. And I seen the mother on the sideline, helpless, crying. There was nothing she could do. And as the ambulance was able to bring him back, they put him in the ambulance and they drove off. And the mother said, "Hey, Wolfie, can you please give me a ride down to the hospital?" And I took her down to the hospital. And as we got down to the hospital, friends and families, they started to come in there, and the place got real packed. And as 3 or 4 minutes passed, there was something that came across the intercom. Code blue, to room 4, code blue. And everybody started running the code to room 4. And then all of a sudden, another announcement came off the intercom system, and it said code blue is off. And at that moment, I turned to his mother and I said to his mother, Nicole, know that our son is dead. And as the word started spreading around the hospital room, my friends, people who I've known, people I love, people who we have slept in the same bed, and sometimes we peed on each other. They were willing to do anything. They said, hey, Wolfie, let's go kill his mother. Let's go kill his father. Let's go kill the dog, the pets, the roaches, whatever. Let's go kill him. And at this time, I wasn't thinking. I said, let's go. And his mom grabbed me by my arm, and she said, let me tell your story like your grandmother. I said, not now. Not now, my baby, not now. She said, no, it'll take a minute, and after the story, you can do what you want to. And she said that if you was a conductor of a train, and you had 250 people depending on you to make the right decision, but if you turned left, sure enough, without a doubt, all 250 would die, even yourself. Would you turn left? No, what kind of question is that? No, I wouldn't. I gotta go. One more part to this. The same 250 people that if you were to make a right turn, then only one person would die and 249 people would live, including yourself. What would you do? I said, well, I'll make the right turn. She said, well, make the right decision now. Because know that your son has died. And it's up to you to go out there and start a political, economic, a spiritual, a cultural revolution so that you can bring about change so no family can ever feel the way you feel today. And it was at that moment that I realized that I needed to do something different. Because I quickly told my friends, hey, man, y'all go ahead. Y'all go ahead home for the rest of the day. Because at that time, I was working with a guy named Dr. Yasser Payne, and he would bring this new concept to me, and the concept was called participatory action, research, right? Where you take people from the neighborhoods that are being impacted by this phenomenon, and you put them on a research team. So you pick the guys on the research team who pop the perks, who take the Xannies, the lady who walked the street at night to feed her family, the person who's in mental health crisis. You get these kind of people on the research team. Because he said it's something special about when you have people being part of that whole solution base. He said it's also a way in which you capture your narrative. Well, I said, interesting. Dr. Yasser Payne. And as we started to embark on this campaign to start these different movements, these different revolutions, we said we can't take this old approach that we used to take, this grandmom approach to solving this violence, this thing we call violence. We just can't be about concern, understanding, and love. So when Wolfie leaves in the middle of the daytime, grandmom's sitting back there, and she's concerned about what he's going to get into. But she understands why he got to make some of the decisions that he has to make because of the structural inequity that's embedded inside his community to where that he can't find a job. According to the People's Report, when we did a study on the east side in South Bridge, we looked at a group between the ages of 18 and 35. Black men, 60% of them did not have a job. The unavailability of jobs, so what he's going to do. So we understand the decisions you got to make in those circumstances. And whether he went to jail that night or he came home safely, we still love little Wolfie. That was our approach. But then we came and we started talking about with Dr. Yasser Payne. Dr. Yasser Payne said, hey, Wolfie, we got to measure outcomes, so we got to teach the people. We got to teach the people about how do you measure some of these things. So he taught us about quantitative and qualitative analysis. We learned SPS, we learned Stata, but we didn't learn it down at the University of Delaware. He brought it to the street corner. So when the system said that we couldn't have felons down at the university, we didn't avoid the mission. We just changed the damn rules. Like my grandmother, the one I talked about earlier, she was raised post Presley Ferguson, but pre-Brown Board of Education. And when you look back at the history books and you go inside her high school, you won't see her name on her high school diploma. But she's one of the smartest women I ever met. And it made me reflect back on my grandmother, who I always idolized because she was able to do the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle, something I can't do now with all my degrees. So I realized that it was a point in time in which we cannot just simply stick by the rules if it means that we can't complete our mission. So then we said we got the matrix, right? Because do you know what happens when you're worried about outcomes and you don't have grandmom and grandpa? You get mandatory minimums. You get mass incarceration. You get a displacement of black and brown people. Generation and generation of loss. And guess what? They realized that they made a mistake 20 years before they decided to switch the law. They already knew that it was a bad law. So the other thing that I realized, so even when we got to the point where we was able to be grandmom and grandpop and look at the matrix and measure our outcomes, we still didn't have champions of the work funded. Because every Cure Violence program, every violent person program that I've been a part of has always been funded to fail. Wolfie, what you mean by funded to fail? That they give you bare knuckle minimum. When you go in there and you say that these guys are experts. Now, the guy from Wilmington might not be an expert in San Francisco. He might not be an expert in Boston, Massachusetts. But he is an expert in Wilmington in understanding what we call gun politics, the street dynamics. He's an expert there. And with the training that we want to provide him, he's really going to elevate and he's really going to be the best he can be. But even with that expertise, they still want you to pay him. Only enough so that at the end of the week, he still got to beg for transportation money come Monday. So it's always been funded to fail, and we always had what we call these one-year funding cycles. So now here I am again, the month of September going into October, and I got to beg people who don't have the lived experience, who don't got the social capital, who don't got the sweat equities inside the city of Wilmington, whether or not you're going to fully fund my program to succeed. Despite the outcomes that we got, that these guys are doing super. So now as we go through what they call now the RFP process, right? And they say, oh, the RFP process is equal. It gives everybody equal access. Another lie. Because even inside there, right there, they got criteria, right? They start putting up barriers immediately. If you're not a 501c3, right? If you don't have 5 years of revenue to show, if you don't have a 15-year strategic plan, right? If you haven't been audited in the last 5 years, you gotta have an audit. So all these barriers they put in front of us so that we cannot compete for the money. So once again, we always in the background, we're asking people, right? Who don't look like us, who don't really understand us, to fund our stuff. And what do they create? I call them, they creating policy at the 30,000-foot level. And all these policies right here have some bad unintended consequences related to them. So until we really was able to get our stuff together to where that we're grandmom and grandpop, we make sure we're doing the outcomes, and we got the champions of this work. Last year around this time, a person came to me. No, it wasn't this time. It was early summer. They said, Darryl, what is one of the main problems you see with the epidemic? I said, the number one problem is that, what I will argue, is that our children inside of some of these inner city schools do not receive a fair education going to school in person 7 to 8 hours a day. And now we're talking about going to a virtual platform. I don't know if y'all seen some of that new math out there. and how they put the 8 over there and move the 4 over there and the 3 there, and somehow they still get 2. I don't know how y'all do that new math, but I know I can't do it. So we, and the champions that I deal with, said, well, we got to find a way in which we can address this issue, because we can't afford for our kids to fall behind. But these right here were champions who said, we're going to start with yes and ignore no. See, because the new folks with the new RFP, you know what they start with? No, we can't do that. No, Darryl, not today. We don't do that one. So now we're forced with $1 billion on the table and people recognizing that violence is a priority within the city. We're forced to beg for money in order to make sure that our children have a chance at life. So anybody here know the definition of hope? I coined this phrase in one of my academic articles. Hope is the belief that tomorrow is going to offer a better opportunity than today. When you have a kid dreaming, when you have a kid really thinking that tomorrow that he's going to be able to do something or he's going to be able to achieve something, then they're less likely to pull a gun out. See, because a lot of times, and how they want to do it now, is that they want to fund the stuff that's part of the criminal justice apparatus, the GVI stuff. So right now in the city, for y'all don't know, there are really 3 types of intervention violence prevention programs. One is what they call GVI, group violent intervention. And some of the criminologists in the room know that this right here is the focused deterrence stuff, right? So focused deterrence is simply this, that we're going to lock you up with certainty, we're going to move you swiftly through the system, and when we find you guilty, we're going to sentence you severely. That's what it says. The whole premises of GVI is based off that. But they learned from the early 80s, the early 90s, and they put this little tag on the front of it. And what they say is that, but first we're going to offer you services. And if you deny the services and then you do something wrong, then we're going to enforce the deterrence part of it. Knowing that there's no way in the world that you can deliver on the promises of all the services. So it's already a lock 'em up game. But guess what though? Because it involves the court system and the police department, it's fully funded for success. The hospital violent intervention program is another one. Christiana Care, when they don't feel like playing with people, they just take their toys and run home. They got the luxury of doing that. But the community-based violent intervention program, we don't have the luxury of that. And each time it's another hurdle, it's another thing. And it reminds me of something that my doctor once told me. I had an infection. He gave me some antibiotics. And he said, Darryl, he didn't call me Wolfie. He said, Darryl, here go 30 pills. Take 1 a day, every day. Even if you feel good, keep taking them. But yet, when we tell them, lawmakers, resource distributors, our community is sick. We're being plagued by violence. We're being plagued by homelessness. We've been plagued by mental health issues. Instead of giving us the 30-day bottle, they only give us 7 days worth. And what happens? The doctor told me, now it becomes resistance to the antibiotics. And that's what's happening now. So every year we got to keep fighting over and over and over again to get where we were at the year before. All because people don't understand that when there's no equity in the distribution of funds, all you're doing is setting us back all and on and on and on. And my goes with this. The one thing that they always call for is research. What did the research tell you? So Tom App, who worked down in the Obama administration, he says this. He says that there shouldn't be an either or. There shouldn't be a GVI without a hospital intervention program, and there should be also included in there a community-based intervention program. But what he also says is this, all of them should be funded for success. And until we, the equity ambassadors, come to grips with that right there, what we're going to have is the constant decaying of black and brown communities to the point that it's not going to be structural inequality leads to physical violence. It's going to be structural inequality leads to structural genocide. And that's where we at. So you got to ask yourself today as you leave here, are you going to be a co-conspirator in the structural genocide of black and brown people, or are you going to become equity ambassadors and stand up for what's right? And I thank you.